Sermon of the week, Vail. What was that line again? Let's see, where was I? I'm getting old. 50 isn't old, sir. Yes, it is. Wait till you get there, and it's not 50. I turn 52 next week. Well, happy early birthday. We'll have to take you out for dinner and dancing. Supper I'll take, but no dancing for this old bag of bones. I have to stretch and strain just to get out of bed in the morning. Yes, you kind of abused your body, haven't you, old man? The younger man put down his pen and stared at his friend. Yeah. Didn't you say, or didn't somebody say our bodies are the temple of God? Yeah, I haven't lived up to God's standard when it comes to taking care of my body. Just another one of my many sins. Thank God for His grace. The older man grabbed a cracker from a basket on the table and then choked. The younger man came around and patted him on the back. Take it easy, old man. We need you alive for a while longer. The older man took a sip from his wine glass. His eyes began to water, but his throat cleared. I'll take your recommendation under advisement. You didn't answer my question. Where did you get this body is the temple idea? I've been writing about it for quite a while now. I think even in our last letter. Yeah, and also in one of the Romans, I think. You sure? I don't remember it. Well, you didn't help me with the Roman letter. True. I'm sure it was in there too. My temple gets foggy at times. Sorry. Where'd you get the idea from? Was it some vision or something? No. It came from, I think, John. We talked quite a bit. Some when I visited his home in Galilee and other times. Really? Yeah, he said it once, and I once read it in one of his manuscripts. It was a rough draft, but he said the master called his body the temple. Said he would raise it up in 3 days. The younger man stared at his older friend for a long while. His older friend stared back at him. For reasons unclear to either, their skins began to tingle just slightly. Just then, their moment was interrupted. Daddy, it's supper time. We're having lamb chops. The younger man's 3-year-old daughter raced into the room wearing nothing but a thin, transparent kerchief over her head. Whoa, her father said, grabbing her. Where are your clothes, little lady? The older man smiled at the scene. I don't need them. Where'd you get that from? He said, putting his cloak over her. Mommy said. She said, a slight pout coming to her angelic face. I don't think so. She did. Come on, let's go ask her and take that veil off your face. Daddy, why does God make us wear clothes? Well, yeah, come on, Dad, tell us, the older man said, bursting into a wide grin. My teacher says Adam and Eve didn't wear any, so I shouldn't have to either. Yes, why is that? The older man said, clapping and bursting into laughter. The little girl didn't notice as tears now began to stream down her face. Come on, little one, let's get you dressed and we'll eat some lamb chops. He whisked his puzzled daughter up in his strong arms and zipped her out of the room. I want to hear your answer, Dad, the older man said, but father and daughter did not hear him. He clasped his hands behind his head and leaned back in his chair, but he lost his balance and the chair rocked backwards with him in tow. He was helpless to stop this journey and hit the hardwood floor with the back of his head. A myriad of stars now took control of his temple. Paul the Apostle is one of the most famous men in the history of the world. In your Bible, he is likely in the top 10 along with Christ, Moses, David, Peter, and John the Baptist. The reasons for this fame are as complex as the man himself. He stands fifth in the number of words he authored in the Bible, but is clearly first in the number of books, 14 that he authored. Though this is debated, he still stands first in every debate, as Moses and John the disciple are each credited with 5. Authoring a book seldom garners the author fame, but when it does so in perpetuity. Looking through history, most famous authors all use real history as the background for their books. Paul does so as well. He He speaks of real events and real people repeatedly in his books. 2 Corinthians is no exception. Paul's world was as complex as at any time in world history, and he was as complex a man as ever walked the planet. He was a Jew born in Tarsus, a Roman city, in 4 AD, 8 years after Christ was born in Bethlehem. This made him a Roman citizen, but he was sent to Jerusalem by his parents, studied and became a Pharisee, a society of Jewish scholars. As Christ was considered old enough to study with the Pharisees at 12 years of age, Luke 2:42, Paul likely was sent to Jerusalem when he was age 12 in 16 AD. He likely studied for some 10 years. In our modern day, it takes 8 or so years past elementary school to get a college degree. Paul would have graduated from Gamaliel's school in about 26 AD. This puts him smack dab in the history with the beginning of Christ's ministry, which began in 27 AD. Paul says he never met the man during the years they were contemporaries, but he says he did meet him in 34 AD on the road to Damascus, where he was blinded and convinced that Christ was the Son of God. 1 Corinthians 15:8. This conversion led to Paul's magnificent life of preaching the gospel and his authorship of a significant part of the Bible. His inspired writings resonate with our troubled world now 2,000 years down the road of history. 2 Corinthians, Paul's third book in the New Testament of your Bible and 47th overall, is somewhat overlooked, as his book of 1 Corinthians expounds on love like no other in history. But his book 2 Corinthians is filled to the brim with history, admonition, the essence of Christ, and ways to not only survive our world but to live happily in it and assist others to do the same. This is all from a very complex man living in a very complex world. In 54 AD, the most cruel and vindictive power the world will ever see ruled the known world. It had been on top of all the nations for some 200 years and was destined to stay there for another 400. Claudius, the fourth Roman emperor, was married to Agrippina, the sister of the third Roman emperor, Caligula. Agrippina's son was Nero, who actually was the real great-great-grandson of Augustus. Anyway, Nero was adopted by Claudius and Agrippina, and when Claudius was poisoned by Agrippina in 54 AD, her 17-year-old son, Nero, became Rome's fifth emperor on October 13th, a date famous in another era of history. Nero murders his mother in 59 AD and subsequently his stepbrother, his wife, and in 68 AD the Apostle Paul. God remained relatively silent during all this mayhem save for one person, the Apostle Paul, a man he had never met until 34 AD on a road to Damascus. But God knew exactly who Paul was and knew exactly what he would accomplish. He knew this man would reestablish his church and make it the beacon of light to all the world to this very day. In 54 AD, Paul embarks on his third missionary journey, traveling from Antioch in modern-day Syria to Ephesus on the southwest Turkish coast near the present-day town of Kusadasi. Here he spends 2 years preaching and teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, a man he never met. He also writes 1 Corinthians while here. What is so striking about all of this is that Paul is the last person anyone would think could build a church around the man from Nazareth, Jesus Christ. He was a Pharisee, a member of the society that orchestrated the murder of Jesus and then persecuted its followers. And there was really no room in the world for another god anyway. Rome had many gods which ruled all aspects of their lives. Jupiter is today listed as the number 1 god in the top 10 list of Roman gods. He was considered the king of the gods. But before Rome there was Greece, and they also had a top 10 list headed by Poseidon. Though the Jews had their god, they represented only about 1% of the world population at the time of some 300 million people. What is interesting is that there were 7 wonders of the ancient world as compiled by Herodotus in 450 BC. Among these was the temple of Diana, also known as Artemis, the number 7 god or goddess on the Greek top 10 list of gods. One of her titles was Diana Lucifera, or light bearer. Sound familiar? Her place in the hierarchy of the gods was that she was the goddess of the hunt, wild animals, fertility, and the moon. As gods went, she had a lot on her plate and had no time for rest. Her temple was in Ephesus and was 450 feet long, 225 feet wide, and stood 60 feet high. It stood on 127 columns and no doubt was visited by Paul many times during his 2 years in Ephesus. In fact, the citizens of Ephesus became wary of Paul, fearing he might somehow destroy that temple. Acts 19:27. Paul did not, but the rise of Christianity in Constantine's Rome led to its destruction during that time. However, its ruins can be seen to this very day. Paul's unpopularity eventually forced him out of Ephesus, and he moved across the Hellespont to Greece, taking residence in Macedonia or northern Greece. It is here that he writes his second letter to the 2 Corinthians in 56 AD. He calls himself a minister of the New Testament, 2 Corinthians 3:6. Though the first 4 Gospels of the New Testament were not published until 70 AD and later, there must have been manuscripts available to Paul and other early Christians to peruse and study. Paul goes on to further define Christ's purpose. And not as Moses, which put a veil over his face, that the children of Israel could not steadfastly look to the end of that which is abolished, but their minds were blinded. For until this day remaineth the same veil untaken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Christ. But even unto this day, when Moses is read, the veil is upon their heart. Nevertheless, when it shall turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away. 2 Corinthians 3:13-16. Veil is an interesting word. The dictionary defines it as a verb meaning to lower, often as a sign of respect or submission. But its sister word, veil, V-E-I-L, is a noun meaning something that covers or obscures. Its verb form means to cover or obscure. Later versions of the Bible correct this V-E-I-L versus V-A-I-L controversy. In any event, Paul's meaning is clear. The veil of unbelief that pervaded the Jewish people from Moses' time forward was lifted by Christ when he was crucified for the sins of not only the Jews but all mankind. Each and every sin of every human from Adam to today and into the future was paid for by Christ, forgiven by God, and will be erased when Christ returns to earth in the very near future. Yet Paul says that the veil, V-A-I-L or V-E-I-L, still hangs over humanity in his day. He is determined to show the world that it can be lifted away if one simply turns to the Lord. He urges the Greeks to turn from their gods such as Diana and believe on the one true God. He says it's just that simple. Nevertheless, when it shall turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away. 2 Corinthians 3:16. How ironic that John says the very same thing in his text, John 3:16. John knew Jesus. Paul never met the man, but both knew the one absolute truth. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, provides the only way to eternal happiness. Paul hammers away at this truth for the entire second half of his life until Nero executes him. The Bible does not speak of his death, but a Clement, a Roman bishop writing in 95 AD, and Eusebius in the 4th century AD speak of his beheading in 64 AD. The Bible can't shut him up, and even the Roman Empire could not shut him up. His words ring through history with greater effect through each and every passing year, keeping step with the continuing rise of evil. God knew, Paul knew, and now we know that only truth will set us free. If only the whole world knew it, the veil of evil could be lifted away from each and every one forever. Moses, on his journeys up Mount Sinai, could not look directly at God, though he spoke to him and watched him write on 2 stone tablets. What is this brilliance that God possesses that few can see him or look at him? The angels, such as Gabriel and Lucifer, talk to him directly, and many surround his throne, but we humans are not equipped to survive his presence. Well, that's only partially true. Adam and Eve were God's constant companions in the Garden of Eden, probably for some 80 earth years. But then something changed. Their ability to be in God's company evaporated in an instant. They didn't want to talk to him or see him anymore. They were in abject fear of him and soon were outcasts, something which all but a few human beings have been ever since. What happened? Did they lose some veil of protection, or did God cover himself with a veil? The answer we all know is that these two violated the trust they had with their Creator. They threw away truth. Therefore, truth is actually an entity as well as a concept. The little girl in our story was yet perfect and saw no need for protection of clothes. Adam and Eve were created the same way, but suddenly the opposite was true. They desperately wanted to be clothed. Maybe truth is an entity after all. God intimates this to all humanity when he builds his temples. He, represented as the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, has its door covered with a veil. This is true of all three of his earthly temples. When Christ took his last breath on the cross, God ripped this veil to shreds. His beautiful plan of salvation was now complete, and through Paul and countless others he could now implement his plan. Matthew 27:51, Mark 15:3, and Luke 23:45 tell of the veil of the temple being rent. John in his gospel does not. But Paul, a Pharisee, no doubt saw this veil many times and maybe was allowed in the most holy place a time or two. I think we have to rethink what is truth. It must be more than a concept. It must be some type of entity, and as Paul states, for we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. It's just another of the myriad questions I want to ask God if I ever have that chance. What is obvious is that if we decide the truth for the truth, we gain power. This is repeated throughout world history and in every court around the world on a daily basis. Every law enforcement body, every court, every scientist, every teacher, and every parent is always trying to get at the truth. It is humanity's greatest need. More than food, more than love, man will not rest until he finds the truth about a thing. But as often as not, he fails. Reasons for that remain unclear, but what is clear is that man needs help in this endeavor. God created us this way. He wants to be an intimate part of our lives. He knows that only by maintaining truth can anything survive. His creation is based on it. All its laws must be followed or things will deteriorate and evaporate into nothingness. Science has just scratched the surface of God's laws, but does know that a law must be followed in order for anything to work or exist. Without gravity, we wouldn't be. It's just that simple. The world must spin just so and not be polluted, or things will not function properly. Only in the 2 centuries has humanity realized how serious pollution is. God provided man with more knowledge, hoping he would edge more and more toward the truth. But thou, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Daniel 12:4. 1798 AD ushered in the time of the end, and knowledge exploded across the globe as never before. We are now 225 years into this 360-year period of the time of the end, which will end in 2158 AD. And instead of edging toward the truth, we seem bent on getting as far away from it as we can. Christ referred to this last period of Earth's history. Many of God's prophets call this the time of the end, the time of trouble. Job did, Job 28:23. David did 5 times in his Psalms. Solomon did, Proverbs 25:19. Isaiah did, Isaiah 33:2. Jeremiah did, Jeremiah 14:8. And Daniel did, Daniel 12:1. Does this all bore you? The endless repeating of texts? Think again. Read any newspaper. Look at any computer. It's all there, time and time and time and time again. Pull out your old dusty Bible and read this stuff, or go online and read it. It's all happening in front of our eyes, yet we don't see it. Pull up that veil over your eyes just enough to see. To see what? To see the truth. Maybe the Bible is at least a part of the entity Paul speaks about repeatedly, truth. Christ hammered away at this point repeatedly during his last days on earth. He called it something even more dire. All these are the beginning of sorrows, Matthew 24:8. Take 5 minutes and read chapter 24 of Matthew. This short chapter alone should lift that veil and expose truth to all of us. Remember, these are words of God himself. As he spoke them, he knew that humanity's future rested in him alone. What a burden, yet what an honor, and what a victory. Growing up in the school of the Pharisees, run by Gamaliel in Jerusalem in 20 BC, was a 15-year-old Paul. He did not grasp the truth either. He believed what he was taught, as does any student, but of course his teachers bent the truth. And when Christ took his last breath on the cross, they thought they had arrived at perfect truth. In fact, they had destroyed truth, but fortunately for only 3 days. Paul knew of these events, and true to his teachings, he agreed to help stamp out heresy by hunting down the followers of the man who tried to upset the Pharisees' agenda of establishing perfect truth. What he didn't realize was that he too had the veil over his head and could not see truth. But in 34 AD, Paul's world turned upside down. Luke recounts his encounter with Christ and subsequent 3 days of blindness. Many of us would have just shrugged it off and went about their merry way, but not Paul. The veil was lifted, and in 3 days of darkness, he saw truth staring him in the face. His record of that encounter, found in his book of 2 Corinthians, is fascinating. It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, whether in body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the 3rd heaven, and I knew such a man, whether in body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise, and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for man to utter. 2 Corinthians 12:1-4. There is more in these 4 verses than we can grasp, but the bottom line is Paul's veil was lifted and he saw truth. He saw reality. He was visited by Christ and taken to speak with God in the 3rd heaven, wherever that may be. God knew it would take a lot to lift Paul's veil and see truth, but he also knew that the result would be wonderful. He knew he would have a fighter, a preacher, a teacher, an instrument, a champion of truth, that he, God, could mold into a powerful weapon against evil. What God also knew was that Paul would now realize that he, Paul, needed God's help constantly. Christ preached this fact day after day after day, but even his disciples did not get it. However, Paul did. For we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. 2 Corinthians 13:8. Those sure were good chops, the old man said, rubbing his tummy. I never tire of good lamb, the young man said. That mint jelly takes everything to perfection. Yeah, life is perfect at times. Daddy, Daddy, how do you like my new dress? His 3-year-old daughter ran into the room and pirouetted in a cute pink dress. Beautiful, the young man said, clapping for her. She pirouetted again. What do you think? She said, turning to the old man. I see you don't need that veil anymore. No, Mommy said the pretty clothes are my veil. She sauntered over to him. Your Mommy is right. She squinched up against him, pushing up the side of his shirt. What's that? She pointed to the red mark on his side. Oh, I got hurt there. Does it still hurt? She asked, rubbing her finger on a red scar. No, not anymore. How'd you get hurt? Did you fall? She pushed up his shirt and saw more red scars and some white ones. Honey, leave the man alone, the younger man said, his face turning red with embarrassment. He hoped to head off his question box daughter. No, it's all right. A man used a whip on me when he thought I was bad. He exposed more scars for her to see on his side and back. You must have been really bad, she said. Well, actually not, but sometimes people think we are bad even though we are not. I hope I'm never bad, she said, still staring at the scars. You will never be. Jesus will always protect you. I know, Mommy said so. With that, she ran out of the room to tell her Mommy what she had seen. Those evil Jews, I hate 'em. How could they do such a thing? The younger man said. I'm sorry about my little girl. No, it's all right. We all need to learn about evil. I see some old and some new scars. How many times have they done that to you? I received 40 stripes, save one 3 times, and I'm sure there will be more. But you can't let them do that. You said yourself your body is the temple of God. You need to get out of this preaching business. Then who will carry on? No, God constantly reminds me of my own shortcomings, but He sustains me. You forget I gave 39 stripes to the backs of many people. But you didn't know. You thought you were doing God's will. No, the old man almost yelled, slamming his fist on the table. I knew I was doing evil, and I live with every stripe I gave every day of my life. One tear escaped the man's left eye and slowly trickled down his cheek, but he did not wipe it away. The young man stared at his friend for a long time. Well, it still just isn't right. You need to think about retiring. The day I retire will be the day I die. You can't think like that. God doesn't expect us to suffer. Our meager sufferings are nothing compared to what He suffered for me, for you, for all of us. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Dessert time, the little girl announced, racing into the room. She was followed by her beautiful Mommy, carrying 2 plates of hot apple pie with vanilla ice cream stacked on top. Here's your forks, the little girl said, handing forks to the 2 men. The tears on the older man's face and the red anger on the younger man's face instantly evaporated into thin air as truth, in its other form love, lifted the veil from their faces, revealing the most scrumptious of desserts.